Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Meg French, and I am the new Executive Director of the Stephen Lewis Foundation. I started with the organization in mid-February, and who could have predicted that 1 month later, we would be dealing with a global pandemic, a shutdown of the office, and all the other global effects of COVID-19 and the response. So it's been an interesting first few months for me as the Executive Director. But it's also meant that, you know, I dove right into the work, and the team at the foundation is just such a wonderful team that our ability to respond and to shift has really gone quite smoothly. Just to give you a little bit of an update on what we've done, of course, we're all working from home, and that's been moving around quite smoothly. We've been able to continue the work from our home offices. But I think more importantly, we've continued to be in touch with our partners, and as much as we can't go and visit them in person, we are able to stay in touch. And they've really talked to us about their challenges, the needs that they're seeing on the ground. We've communicated with them that there is flexibility in our funding and our support. So as they're looking to adapt their work and finding new ways of putting their programs into place, that they have our support throughout that. We've heard, and you're going to hear today in this conversation, about the impacts on grandmothers and the children that they care for, kids out of school, people living with HIV, the access to medicines for those people, the rise of violence and discrimination amongst LGBTIQ communities as well, and overall just the general strain on mental health that we've been hearing across the board as well. And so as we've heard from our partners on the challenges that they face and the work that they're doing and their commitment to continue to serve their communities, what as the Stephen Lewis Foundation has become clear to us and it was reinforced to us is that even during what's been, you know, an economic challenging time for everyone, that we are just very determined in our commitment to continue to support our partners and to ensure that the commitment that we have made to them, the financial commitment we've made to them, we can continue to fulfill that commitment. And so we launched in April a COVID-19 appeal. I'm sure you've all heard from us through email or phone call in some way about that appeal. And I'm really pleased to report on the generous response of our supporters, to thank you very much for the support that you have provided to us during this time. We've seen grandmothers finding new ways to do fundraising, even in the midst of quarantines and restrictions on movements. We've seen individuals make donations, you know, above and beyond what they've made in the past. We've had new monthly donors sign up, which is really a critical and a reliable source of funding for us. And we've seen flexibility and increased funding from foundations and unions and others. And so, you know, there's a real movement behind the Stephen Lewis Foundation amongst our supporters in support and in global solidarity with the community-based organizations that we support in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think, you know, it's particularly interesting or important that we have that support because, you know, often fundraising work and donations are often driven by, particularly in sort of what would be sort of emergency settings, but are driven by the coverage that we see in the media of these events. And one of the things that's become clear in this global pandemic is that the reporting on the situation and the lived experiences of people around the world is not equal. We get a lot of reports about what's going on in Europe, obviously in North America as well. I think in the past few days, we've seen increasing coverage on what's happening in Latin America, but we're just not getting the same coverage about the impact of COVID-19 in sub-Saharan Africa. And part of that might be is that, currently the numbers are not as high. And so the impact of there's a belief that the impact of the virus is not having the same levels of challenge, or it's not creating the same challenges. But there's a lot of debate about those numbers. Are they a true reflection of the numbers? Is the testing that's happening great enough to actually be confident in those numbers? But the flip side of it is also, is it maybe the numbers are not as high because there are health systems that have learned a lot from other pandemics and epidemics, whether that's from HIV or Ebola, and how health systems and communities respond to the need for contact tracing or testing and things. And, likely it's a balance of both of those things, a bit of both. And so while the numbers, we may not have a clear sense, or they may not even be as high, the reality is that the impact of the lockdowns and the restrictions on movement is high on communities. That the challenges that those lockdowns bring are quite great for the communities that our partners support, and to their access to food, to their income security, to their mental health, to their ability to stay on treatment. And we need to recognize that the needs are still great, and the need for support is still great, and that our partners are working day and night to continue to provide the services that they have come to be relied upon for. And so we thought, given that context, that it would be really helpful to hold a webinar like this, and to try to share some of the experiences that our partners are having in their communities, and so that you can learn a bit more about the work that they're doing and what the lived experience is. And so we've invited 2 of our field representatives here today to be part of that conversation. The Stephen Lewis Foundation relies on the expertise of several African and Africa-based consultant field representatives. And I just want to give you a sense of what they do and what their role is. They act as our eyes, our ears, the face of the organization, the voice of the foundation on the ground. And each one of them has extensive experience with community-based HIV and AIDS initiatives. And they're a really critical part of how the Stephen Lewis Foundation works. The field visits that the field representatives do are part of our process for making decisions about who we partner with. So what happens is that one of our trusted field representatives will visit an organization to assess its ability to implement programs, its connection to the community, its financial accountability systems. And the field visit is really an important opportunity as we look at building a relationship with a potential new partner. We want to foster an open, a trusting, and a responsive partnership, and it starts with those visits. And so throughout the visits, the field representatives will meet with program staff, they'll meet with the board, they'll conduct one-on-one meetings with beneficiaries of the programs from that organization. And they look at the organization's leadership structure and their governance. They review the financial management systems, they evaluate the budgets and the programs. And part of each visit is also to go into the community and see the organization's work firsthand and the impact that it's having on that community. And so that's the role that the field representatives play as we choose our partners, but then they also continue to play a really important role with existing partners. And those same types of field visits, looking at a lot of those same things, continue through regular visits with existing partners. But in addition to that, they play a role in also helping to build capacity of our partners. And so if there's an element of financial management or governance, perhaps, that the partner is looking to strengthen, we can help through the field representatives to build that capacity. They also, because the field representatives visit quite a number of different organizations, they can help build connections between organizations. And so there's learning across our partners and discussion around the work that they're doing and what they're learning and the different approaches that they have as well. And so that's a really critical part of the work that our field representatives have. So I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure that we have enough time for the conversation. But before I move on, I just want to go through a couple of logistical points. If there are any technical difficulties that you'll have, and hopefully there won't be any, but in the age of Zoom, there could be. And you'll see that there's a chat option on your screen. And if you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to go into that chat option and type it up, and someone will see what they can do to help you out. But then the other important piece is that at the end of our discussion, we'd like to have time for a Q&A. And there is a Q&A option as part of this webinar. And so as you're listening to the conversation today, if there's any questions that occur to you, please go to the Q&A and enter in your question there, and we will try to get to as many of those questions as possible. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm really pleased today that we have two field representatives here to speak to you. The first field representative is Ruth Oching, and Ruth is joining us from her home in Uganda. Ruth is a human rights defender with extensive experience in the area of women, peace, and human security. And her work includes leading an international women's organization for the past 15 years, where she spearheaded the Uganda Women's Movement campaign for inclusion of women in the Juba peace process between Rebel Joseph Kony and the government of Uganda. She initiated a dialogue between Uganda women peace activists and the Office of the Prime Minister in Uganda to develop a gender-responsive peace and recovery program. And in 2013, she was appointed by UN Women on the 17-member team of the high-level advisory board members for the global study that reviewed the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. In 2016, she was appointed as the Civil Society Advisory Governor representing Africa in the Commonwealth Foundation. And most importantly to us, in 2016, she joined the Stephen Lewis Foundation as a field representative. So welcome, Ruth. Our second field representative is Mandeepa Machacha, and she's joining us from Botswana. Mandeepa is a feminist development practitioner with a comprehensive range of skills acquired from having worked for the Botswana government, the nonprofit sector, and the UN for over 10 years. Her work, among others, includes human rights advocacy, humanitarian assistance, sustainable development initiatives, curriculum development, monitoring and evaluation, and grant making. And she also does training, facilitation, and capacity building. Mandeepa holds degrees in law, social work, and public administration, and is currently completing her Doctor of Laws in Human Rights Law at the University of Pretoria Center for Human Rights. And Mandeepa joined the SLF in 2019 as a field representative. And so our conversation today, and welcome Mandeepa, our conversation today is going to be led by Leah Odell-Benson, and Leah is the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Manager for the Stephen Lewis Foundation. Born in Barbados, Leah spent many years working in the Caribbean on gender and development issues, including violence against women, transformational leadership, and HIV and AIDS through the UN Women Caribbean Office. And she also joined the SLF in 2016. So Ruth and Mandeepa, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And Leah, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Meg, for that lovely introduction. And thanks to all of you for spending this next hour with us. We know that your time, especially under these conditions, is really precious. So thank you for choosing to spend this next little while with us. You know, I get the tremendous privilege of engaging with our amazing field representatives on a regular basis through my work, but it's not often that they get the chance to directly speak to you, the supporters of the foundation. So I'm really excited about this opportunity for us to share and for us to learn from each other. And so the first question I really want to ask our two field representatives is, we know that the work that you do for the foundation is highly technical work, but I wanted to ask you, what does it mean to you to be field representative for the foundation? Because there's a lot of hard work in there, and I think it would be good for some of our supporters to know a little bit about what it means to do this work on a regular basis. Mandeepa, why don't we start with you?
Uh, Thank you, Leah, and thank you, Meg, for that incredible introduction. Um, well, I think being a field rep at SLF means a lot of things to me. But I think I'd begin from the point of view of it being a privilege. It's very much a privilege to work with an organization like the SLF, whose work I've actually admired for a very long time, and you know the ethos and ethics of which are so in line with my own. This is not something that's easy these days, where you're kind of stuck in this rat race in life, and you kind of have to just do whatever job you can in order for you to survive. It means a lot to me that I can work for an organization which has such a high ethical standard, and which really believes in the same kind of things that I believe in. Um, as much as it is a privilege, I also know that working for the SLF is very much a responsibility. Being the face of a donor, especially in an area such as sub-Saharan Africa, which is my home, which has been ravaged by the HIV and AIDS virus, the HIV virus and AIDS, as well as many other social issues that we have as a region. Oftentimes the nonprofit sector, which I've worked in for quite some time, is always looking to donors as these gods. And it's very difficult at times to build the kind of relationships that I've seen SLF has built with their partners. There's oftentimes quite a power, a relationship where donors are coming from a position of power. So, representing a donor is very much a position which I regard as a responsibility. And a lot of the work that I try and engage in, the way that I try and work, I really try and, approach our partnerships as partnerships, and which is something that I've learned very much from SLF. I've learned to, another thing that I believe, being part of the SLF means to me is being able to work at a community basis with, these incredible people. You can't stop talking about the kind of work that these really brave activists are doing, from grandmothers to children to the LGBT community, who are working under such stressful conditions in countries where their lives are deemed as illegal. It's such a wonderful privilege to be able to work with people, these very brave people, the face of social activism in Africa, and people who are doing such incredible work for the movements, and also for the work in relation to HIV and AIDS. So it's a lot. It's an evolving relationship. It's definitely also a journey. But I really would not have chosen a better organization to work with. Thank you.
Thanks, Mandeepan. And Ruth?
Much, Leah, and I'll start by thanking you and all our supporters at the Stephen Lewis Foundation for making this possible, because it is only when we talk to one another that we can actually energize each other and be able to get new ideas of how to deal with the situations we are in. But to go to your point, what makes me really work as a field representative is because it is a continuity of what I have loved to do all my life. And working with Stephen Lewis Foundation is so important because of the organization's values. And I always say it's an organization with a soul. I've grown up seeing very many disadvantaged people. Growing up in my father's home, who was a priest, I was able to learn so much about the differences that are out there with different people. I was taught to know that nobody is going to be happy if if you are not happy, if your neighbors are not happy. I was taught to know that you can only be useful on earth if you really is going to support other people. So when I stepped down from from ISIS Wiki, where I had worked for a long time, and I got this privilege to work with Stephen Lewis, it was just my continuity of seeing how to continue contributing to the most disadvantaged. Because most people, when we talk about development, most times the development is talked about from the macro. And it's very, very necessary to know that in most cases, that development that everybody talks about here in Southern Africa, it never trickles down to the people who really need that support. And that's why I felt excited to be part of this conversation, because COVID has exposed what the world has been calling development. And of course, it has shown us the challenges and the privileges that are out there. And it has also enabled us to know there are quite a number of challenges that people are having out there. But to work with Stephen Lewis, and I put thumbs up again, your value and ethos of contributing to the grassroots have remained the reality, because from what we have been hearing during this COVID time, these CBOs who are at the grassroots have remained the anchors of people who can't help themselves. So I feel if we are talking about an organization that built structures that are sustainable, that are relevant to the people who need the kind of support, it is Stephen Lewis Foundation. And that one makes me to say, if there is an opportunity to work with Stephen Lewis Foundation, I will work with it until I become a grandmother who can't walk, but just crawl. If I can give any energy, if I can give any knowledge, I will still do it. Because what you have done for the people, and as you'll hear us speak, you don't know what you have done. If you were not there, maybe it would have been different for very many people. I'll stop there. I can talk up to tomorrow.
Thank you, Ruth and Mandipa, for those very heartfelt contributions. I think we'll dive right in, because the reality is that every country in Africa right now and in sub-Saharan Africa has reported cases of COVID, and that governments have taken a range of different prevention measures and containment measures. But in Canada, we're really not hearing too much about what's happening on the ground. And so we'd be keen to hear from you about your experiences and your perspectives on what's happening on the ground in your respective countries, just so we have a sense of how the pandemic is playing out there, what measures governments have put in place and what community needs are in this moment. And Ruth, do you want to go ahead and go first, or Mandipa, go for it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And I'd like to greet your listeners as well. I didn't do that previously. Thank you for tuning in. Well, I, as Meg mentioned, am currently in Botswana. Just to contextualize COVID currently right now, we are sitting at 35 cases and 1 death at the present moment. We've upped our testing capacity, I think, in the past couple of weeks. So we're not 100% convinced that these numbers are indicative of what is going on. However, we aren't having a lot of people in the hospital. We're not really having a very overburdened health sector, and we would be expecting there to be at least sick people, even if they weren't diagnosed as such. However, the pandemic has affected us in many ways. I think to begin with, there's definitely has been what I think experts are calling an anticipatory anxiety which we've been feeling, because there's been such doom and gloom that has been predicted for not only Botswana, but Africa, the sub-Saharan region especially. We have very poor healthcare systems, we have fragile economies, we have, everything that we were told that, if COVID comes, it's completely going to destroy us. So even in the absence of the number of cases, we definitely have had a mental health kind of effect from all the predictions and all the anticipation of waiting for something big to happen. We also had a lockdown previously, which was relaxed last week, and this has had many ramifications, economic for the most part, because the lockdown was pretty severe. Most industries, except essential industries, were locked down. People movement was restricted to the point where people could not leave their houses without a permit, even if it was to get healthcare or even if it was to get groceries. So very much a restriction of movement. People are not able to work. A large part of our population works in the informal sector. So, people really, and living on a month-to-month basis, people really weren't able to bring in any sort of money. The state did come in with a few economic stimuluses. They had a salary a package which they were giving to people who weren't able to pay their employers. It wasn't a lot. It was about $250, and there was a food package which was being delivered to people as well. Still, I don't think would have been enough to make up for the amount of losses that people had. There was definitely a lot of other effects as well. We have had, increases. One of SLF's partners is an NGO which works, with HIV and AIDS, but mainly with issues in relation to women and gender-based violence, called Women Against Rape. Women Against Rape has reported higher incidences in gender-based violence in this COVID period. Unfortunately, we have only one shelter in the country, and that shelter can only accommodate so many people. So we've had definitely a shortage of hands in relation to the gender-based violence problem, which already was rife in the country, but now has become even bigger under the lockdown systems. Lockdowns are now locking people down with people that they can't run away from. And so we've had increases in that as well. Children haven't been able to go to school. In our country, children eat at school. So some of the, some children who weren't able to go to school weren't even able to get the only meals that they would be able to get that day. So definitely also ramifications for our children as well. People living with HIV have not been able to take care of themselves as well as they would have liked, because, we haven't even been allowed to go outside and exercise. I have heard of some cases of people who weren't able to get their medication the lockdown was initially for 30 days and then extended. So people had medication for maybe 30 days. And then once the lockdown was extended, after that, they might have not had access to, the type of healthcare that they needed at the time. Definitely very, very large ramifications on the women in the country. Women are always affected 10 times more in any sort of situation. So as I mentioned already, issues in relation to gender-based violence as well, but also because of the lockdowns, women are taking on a lot more care responsibilities. We're now home schooling our children, as well as being expected to work, as well as, being expected to take care of our elders, as well as being expected to take care of everybody. So definitely so much strain, which is happening currently on the women in the country. Just a general, when I speak to anybody at home, generally there's just a very huge fatigue. And I think also the uncertainty and the never ending kind of aspect of this, where everything is kind of in response to something else. We just don't know when anything is going to end. We don't know when we can tell our children that they're going back to school. We don't know when we can tell our elders that, they'll be able to get that extra, social package. We just don't know anything. There's no certainty at this point. So even though, as I said, I qualified this conversation by saying that currently our numbers aren't that high, we have still been really, really affected by this pandemic. Thank you, Leah.
And Ruth?
Yeah, that story is not different, but maybe I will start by saying since this COVID started unaware, what the government in East Africa are doing at the moment is to do with prevention. So the first thing they did was to find ways and means of stopping people from movement. So lockdown became one of the strategies to slow down the spread. The other aspect they immediately did was to close the borders. Rwanda closed, the Uganda closed, the Kenya closed. Tanzania and Burundi didn't close because they had their own perspective of what the pandemic was all about. Having done that, then they went into restricting vehicles. So all of us went into lockdown. You are not supposed to walk anywhere after 7 p.m. There is a curfew up to now in Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda from 7 p.m. to 6 in the morning. This surprisingly was only done among the city dwellers, because people in grassroots communities, they seem not to have understood how that would make sense to them. So they continue moving. Of course, the only thing that they got affected also was that the churches were closed, no weddings were allowed, no funerals. And you know, Africans, when someone has died, they go in hundreds and hundreds. So they couldn't allow that. But then government started coming out with some ideas of testing, and testing was mainly targeted to specific kind of groupings. The first and foremost were the truck drivers, because the trucks that bring food to Uganda, Rwanda, DRC were allowed to move since we are a landlocked country. And to our surprise, it looked like quite a number of those truck drivers were found to be positive. And that caused the haywire, because now community members where the trucks pass started getting very scared and actually started to start stoning the truck drivers. As I speak now, there has been a lot of friction between Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda, because either sides, communities where these trucks pass, have been stoned, abused, and even refused to be given the food. They have also tested the security sector, because this whole stimulus package, which different countries have, as I will say later, is being done by the security sector, the army and the police. And that also has its own consequences. For those whom they find with the virus, they are locked up in one place, and some of the places these people say have been very unsafe because they share the same sanitary places, and not knowing whether others are just contained, because immediately they know they get somebody who has got the virus, then they start tracking all the people that he may have got in contact with. And all these are all put in one place. So sometimes some are not actually with the virus, but at the end of the day, they find themselves with the virus. When you look at the way they are trying to support the most disadvantaged, of course, as I said, it is something that the governments were taken unaware, and in my own view, because they have never had very human security related planning, they are kind of firefighting to see how they are going to calm people, because people are not allowed to get out of houses. But then how do they get the food when they only get food when they work? So my government came up with distribution of some food, which didn't take long before it got exhausted. And of course, people became very jittery because they can't have enough food. And as we speak now, we find a lot of violations that are going on because of lack of food, and also because people now don't know how to survive together. One of the things that has really impacted a lot in this country is the food insecurity. And this to me has been because of the poor planning of the agriculture sector. It is always one which gets the least, and also the health sector. Those two have been getting the least budgets every time we read our budgets. And now with COVID, we have noted that what within their firefighting, what they have now done is to forget about the continuous conditions that people live with, like HIV and AIDS, cancer, things like high blood pressure. All those people are really in a lot of need. There is an example where a CBO came on and said, look, we have 289 children who are living positive with the HIV and AIDS. But as we speak now, they can't go to get their drugs. They can't be tested. Even those who have the drug, they cannot take because they don't have the food. So people started SOS getting some food, but that is just for a short time. So there is a kid who came and said, I can't take my drug because my stomach is empty, and we were taught that you have to eat before you take that drug. Domestic violence has escalated. And talking about domestic violence, gender-based violence, when I talk to our beneficiaries in different countries, I talked to some in Malawi, I talked to some from Kenya, the whole essence of violating children, abandoning children, incest has gone high. Domestic violence, as I speak now, in 3 months, in South Malawi, Sanji has reported that they had 26 girls who were raped. There are 17 girls who are forced to go into marriage. And in Uganda, the numbers are huge because of our media is now tracking and following. Domestic violence is recorded up to about 500 cases with the police. And those are just drops in the water, because those which are not reported are so many. So maybe I will stop here. I will wait for questions. But the bottom line is that the planning and the resourcing of agriculture and health is so poor. Government, especially my government here, does not have food silos. So when this happened, they started running around buying food from vendors, which of course wasn't enough. So there's a lot of crisis going on, but I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. And what's coming across quite clearly to me is that, communities, underserved communities, vulnerable communities have been made even more vulnerabilized by this pandemic. So my next question then is, what is the role that community-based organizations are playing in responding to COVID with these realities? We know that they've been, devising and developing community-specific programming, for a long time. How are they adjusting and adapting their services to meet these new and unprecedented challenges that are being experienced as a result of this pandemic?
Can I go?
Yes, Ruth, you can absolutely go.
Okay.
Please
yeah, it of course it is quite challenging, but as I said earlier, these are organizations that also share the ethos of Stephen Lewis Foundation. And most of them, you see that they have really taken their role with a passion. And whenever there are such challenges, they always come up with some little innovations. For example, here in Uganda, those organizations that I've just talked about who are caring for people living with HIV and AIDS, when we got this lockdown, some of the boys decided to borrow bicycles. And actually, one was commented that he has been riding this bicycle for over 60 kilometers to go to the health center where he thought he would get the medication for these children. And if he doesn't get, then he goes to the next one. But he reported it with a lot of excitement when he went to another health center, and then he found the drugs. He presented all the 289 cards for these children, and he was able to get the medicine. He rode back to his community, and he went distributing these medicine. He also went around the community to tell people we must share this food, and that's how the Catholic Church was aware and was able to give these children some food. I think that is one of the ways that they are really trying to do it. They are foot soldiers who have never lost hope. They always get alternatives. In Lesotho, my friend Rose told me that when schools got closed, and that was their entry point to caring for children and orphans, as well as parents who are suffering from HIV and AIDS, and they had just got money from PEPFAR, they decided to go and talk to to work through faith-based institutions to see to it, because the faith-based institutions were still open in Lesotho. I don't know whether they have closed now, but she said they were open. So they used the faith-based institutions as people came in for prayer, to raise awareness, to find out how many were not getting their ARVs, how many don't have food, and continue collecting within communities the little that they could get. In Malawi, in Rupias, our partner, has really used the volunteers who live near communities. And these volunteers have been trained on the ABC of how to protect yourself from COVID. Of course, there are challenges in communities, but Naume tells me that when they go back, these volunteers go house to house, telling them to make sure that there is this virus. We don't need to converge in one place. Let children play in their own homes. Don't go away to other places, because you may end up getting infected. So this way they have been sending out messages, training them, and they have also said they use radios, televisions, and in Africa, where they can't access radios because some are too poor even to have a radio. These community-based organizations are using what I call loudspeakers. So they go through communities announcing what has befallen of the world. We have this virus, and this is how it manifests, and this is what you need to do. So a few examples show that they have not sat down. In villages where they can still walk, they are still doing the work. And of course, they are also using telephone calls to their community offices to tell them, to share what they have done and the gaps that are there. And they sit down again and strategize how to move forward. Yeah, I will stop there for now.
Thanks, Ruth. And I'm cognizant of time. So I just want to ask one more question. Maybe you can answer this, Mandeepa. You know, this whole pandemic has ushered in a lot of economic uncertainty. We're all operating in quite uncertain times. What message do you have for our supporters as it relates to supporting the work of community-based organizations, especially in moments like these? Is there anything that you want to, you know, say about the work of these organizations and the importance of them? They've been at the forefront of the HIV and AIDS movement since the onset. They are now grappling with a whole new set of challenges, many of which are quite nuanced. Can you speak a bit to our supporters about the importance of these organizations to the communities and beneficiaries that are in them?
Thank you, Leah. I think I would just really be reiterating what Ruth has said. I think she's put it very clearly, exactly what the community-based organizations are doing. Firstly, you know, we first need to take into consideration that these are organizations which are almost used to functioning in, you know, tight and very desperate circumstances. So these are people who are, I mean, you know, nobody's used to COVID, but definitely these people have the tools because they have been functioning under very, very dire and desperate circumstances for time immemorial and doing, you know, stretching a buck to the point of, you know, doing so much with so little. This is just the bread and butter of these organizations. There's definitely a need to continue supporting them because, as you know, Ruth has mentioned, and I'm going to keep going back to what she said, development currently right now in Africa is happening from a ground up level. I mean, that's really the only one that we can talk about. And so if we stop supporting these people, definitely there is going to be a collapse. They are holding communities together. You know, with the little that we're getting from donors, with the amount that we're getting from donors, they're taking it and they single-handedly holding communities together. I think that there's an increased urgency for them to be supported during these times because, you know, COVID has charted completely has brought in uncharted territory, and the other problems didn't go away. So it's not like the problems that we had before COVID went away. We just have even more problems and the situation is even more desperate. So I think the appeal that I would really have to our donors is that, you know, we have been very grateful and our supporters for everything that we have received. We would be very grateful to receive it, to keep receiving it because it's definitely needed. And now really more than ever is when we need the support from our generous supporters. Thank you.
Thank you. And time has just flown, as it does when you're engaged. And I cannot believe the time. So what we want to do, unless there are any last thoughts and reflections, is open it up to you for any questions that you may have for Ruth and Mandeepa or for myself. This is the time to ask. Okay. Hi, Meg.
Hey, sorry. I've been looking at the Q&A and things, and so just in terms of some of the questions that we've had, I mean, I think one of the things, and you know, Mandeepa and both Ruth, you both talked about, you know, Ruth, you talked about how organizations are not sitting down, and Mandeepa, you talked about how critically important it is that they continue to do the work, and they're really the organizations on the ground that are providing the direct service during these times. And, you know, the COVID-19 is going to be, you know, all the talk about it is that there will be resurgence, or, you know, while the doors may be opening again, they may be shut down again. And so when we think about sort of the longer term implications for our partners, for community-based organizations, what have you been hearing, or what are your thoughts about how community-based organizations are going to have to adapt in the long run, or or what kind of support will they require as a result of the long-term nature of this in the long run as well? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Can I go?
Yes, we do.
Sure, yes.
Yeah, I think this is what, just as Meg, you have said, it could do, we could do start again and it shuts up and we get it again. But I need to first of all just to emphasize that COVID has exposed that the development strategies or the whole paradigm of developing it has been really based on markets and not the human security. And as we have worked with these people all along, they have told us, some of them actually tell us that if Stephen Lewis Foundation was not there, most of them would have died. So with the COVID coming in, the future, I don't even want to talk about the future because Meg, what I know is that first and foremost, as it opens up a bit, there will be the need for emergency, the emergency support. Because these people, the grandmothers have all the little monies that they have been using and saving in their merry-go-round. They have used it to buy food because the food that is being given by governments is not enough.
No.
So we need to first and foremost prepare resources for just the emergency, especially among the grandmothers. These are women who are left with so many children, and they are now seniors, and they can't go out to work. So even to put them back on their feet again, we must put aside some money for emergency. I also believe that it's not only them, but even Stephen Lewis Foundation, because of the challenges that COVID has brought, we shall need money for rethinking and replanning on how we are going to deal with these community-based organizations. As my colleague said, who have been doing work with very little money. And as I said, majority of donors don't actually push their money there because they push them in policy formulation and not in the day-to-day lives of people. So in conclusion, I feel we shall need to get resources for emergency. We shall need to get resources for planning and re-strategizing, capacity building of these communities to start doing things differently. Most of them don't really have the technology as we are doing now to be able to link and talk about what is happening. We may need to do that. The whole essence of continuing to have nutrients to keep them going for those who live positive is a critical issue, with the agriculture not being the priority of most of the governments. How are we going to revamp these women and grandmothers and people living with HIV and AIDS to go back to the land and do some modern farming? I think for me, those are the few critical ones I think we could start with.
Thank you so much. I am conscious of the time and the fact that we did book this webinar for an hour and that people will have given us the hour. And so we were not going to get to all of the questions, but there is one question that I think would be a wonderful way to close this conversation. And I'd like to hear, if I can, from both of you. Mandeepa, maybe we can start with you. And the question is, what gives you hope? You're on mute, Mandeepa.
Well, it's not really a difficult question, but it's a difficult question in the current climate, where I think everything seems to, like, bad seems to be going on top of bad, seems to be going on top of bad. But it's actually it's quite simple and quite easy. It's quite easy to answer. The women of Africa, I think, really give me hope. I've been working with women in various types of spaces. Mainly community-based, work, but delving in all sorts of types of responses, and definitely the women of Africa give me hope. These are people who you cannot tell that the situation is bad. They'll always find a way in which they will turn the situation around. Whatever situation that they're in, they are people who can basically turn wine out of water. I would say, they really, really, really do. They're people who are probably living in terms of the lowest that they can possibly live in terms of society. They're people who are bogged down by every single societal kind of ill, people who are affected by people who are living with HIV, people who are raising children under, very, very difficult circumstances, people who are forced to head families at very young ages, people who are exposed to endemic levels of gender-based violence, people who are not food secure, people who work land which doesn't belong to them every day. And yet, they still wake up in the morning and they take care of their children. They make sure their children go to school. And these are really the people who are the backbone of this continent and of any sort of social movements, including, a lot of the projects that the SLF funds. So I definitely, I looked to my fellow women in Africa, definitely women like Ruth as well. It's been such a privilege to work with somebody like Ruth, who has the kind of experience that she has, and the kind of knowledge that she has. Yeah, I think that's it. Without getting too sentimental, I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Ruth, what gives you
Madiba, I
hope?
think you have said it. Yeah, Madiba has said it all, the power of an African woman. But I want to make a rejoinder to say, Stephen Lewis Foundation, you give me hope because you are an organization with a soul. I know very well that if you are supported in this new world order, definitely there is a lot of hope that we can continue transforming the lives of the most disadvantaged people. I have, as Madiba said, I have also worked with so many organizations out there. I have interacted with very many funders, but because of your way of fundraising and the way you have determined to put money where it is needed most, it gives me hope. And please, our partners, give us money, because